Today was my 35th birthday. I woke up feeling the usual aches and pains that came with my chronic illness, a constant companion since childhood. As the CEO of a thriving tech startup, I usually masked my pain with work and caffeine, but not today. Today felt different, heavier somehow. I decided a trip to the private clinic was necessary, a place I'd come to view almost as a second home. I knew most of the staff by name, but it was Tom, the young nurse, who always caught my attention. Tom was charming, with a quick smile that made many of the patients blush, myself included. He was also persistent. Today, when I walked through the clinic's doors, he was the first to greet me. "Happy birthday, Elena, looking sharp as always," he grinned, his eyes lighting up as he approached me. "You know, you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here, you know." I sighed, settling onto the clinic bed. "Appreciate it, Tom, but you know my situation. It's complicated." As Tom prepared the drip, he didn't miss a beat. "I don't care about your illness, Elena. I like you. Whenever you're ready to talk about us, I'm here." As Tom busied himself with the charts, I tried to focus on the positives. I was successful, I was independent, but as much as I hated to admit it, I was lonely too. The day dragged on with the usual rounds of tests and doctor's visits. By late afternoon, I was ready to head back home, but Tom had other ideas. "Hey, birthday girl, you can't just go home and mope. Let's grab dinner, my treat. Let's celebrate you," he insisted. I hesitated. It was tempting to spend more time with him outside the sterile clinic walls. "Okay, but just as friends." "Just as friends," he agreed, but the twinkle in his eye said more. Dinner with Tom was easy and filled with laughter. He had a way of making me forget about the clinical coldness of my routine. As we talked, it wasn't just about my health or the clinic, it was about movies, travel, and food. It was normal, and for a moment, I let myself enjoy it. "Elena, you're incredible, you know that?" Tom said as he walked me to my car afterward. "Listen, I meant what I said earlier. I want to be there for you, in whatever way you let me." I looked up at him, the streetlights casting shadows across his earnest face. "Tom, it's not that simple. My life, my health, it's a lot for anyone to handle." "I'm not just anyone, Elena. I'm the guy who's asking you to take a chance on me," he replied, his voice steady and sure. I felt a rush of emotions. Here was this wonderful man, willing to accept me with all my complications. "Let's take it slow, okay?" As I drove home, his invitation replayed in my mind. Maybe, just maybe, I could let myself have this slice of happiness. After all, wasn't life too short to spend alone? 6 months flew by faster than I could have imagined. Tom and I were seeing each other regularly, and every moment spent together seemed to ease the constant discomfort of my illness. He made everything feel simpler, lighter. Yet, beneath the surface, I harbored reservations about our future given my health, but Tom never seemed to waver. One crisp Saturday evening, as the autumn leaves painted the city in hues of orange and red, Tom suggested a walk through the park after dinner. "Elena, you know I'm not much for fancy speeches, right?" Tom started, his voice a bit shaky, which was unlike him. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about how happy you make me. I want this to be a forever thing." I felt my heart skip a beat. "Tom, are you sure? You know my situation. It's not going to get any easier." "Yeah, I know. And I don't care. I want all of it, the good days, the bad days, and everything in between." He then took a small box out of his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple, yet beautiful ring. "Elena, will you marry me?" The proposal caught me off guard. I knew I loved him, but commitment at this level was something I hadn't allowed myself to consider seriously because of my health complications. Seeing him there, so sure of us, made all my defenses start to crumble. "Yes, Tom. Yes, I'll marry you." We embraced, and for a moment, the world around us seemed to disappear. It was just us, and it felt right. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning. We decided on a small ceremony, nothing fancy, just us and a few close friends, including his sister and her husband. But before any of that, I needed to address the practicalities of our future together. Sitting down with Tom one evening, I brought out the prenuptial agreement I had drawn up. I want to talk about something a bit, well, practical. It's important, given my business and my health. Tom nodded. Anything, Elena. I handed him the papers. It's a prenup. He took the documents, scanning them briefly before looking up at me with a smile. If that makes you feel secure, I'm okay with it. I'm not here for the money, Elena. I'm here for you. And you're sure? You're really sure about this? I pressed, needing to hear it just one more time. Absolutely, he assured me, signing the document without a second thought. Now, can we go back to planning our tiny wedding? Yeah, we can, I replied, feeling a mixture of relief and love. Tom's easy acceptance of the prenup reassured me of his intentions and commitment. Our wedding day was simple and perfect. The city hall ceremony was quick, and the only people present were those we loved most. Standing there, exchanging vows with Tom, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, life was giving me a chance to have something beautiful, despite everything. Life after our quiet little wedding was, for a while, pretty close to what I'd imagined as perfect. Tom and I settled into our new life together, and he took over running the household. It was a nice change. I'd come home to incredible smells wafting from the kitchen, and the place looked spotless. The first few months felt like we were in some sort of honeymoon phase that just kept going. But about a year in, things started to change subtly. I noticed that Tom seemed a bit off. His enthusiasm for things around the house began to wane, and he seemed more withdrawn. At first, I chalked it up to the adjustment of living together, or the end of the honeymoon phase, but the shift was palpable. One day, I came home early to surprise him with news about a potential new client for my business. I walked in, expecting to find him bustling around in the kitchen or maybe sorting out the laundry. Instead, the house was quiet, too quiet. Puzzled, I walked towards the kitchen, and that's when I heard it, voice. I paused by the door, listening. A woman's voice, cheerful and unfamiliar, chatting away as if she owned the place. Pushing the door open, I saw a middle-aged woman, humming as she chopped vegetables. She looked up, startled. Oh, you must be Elena. I'm June. Tom didn't say you'd be home this early. June? And who exactly are you? I managed to keep my voice steady, despite the shock. I'm the housekeeper. Tom hired me about a year ago. I come in a few times a week to clean up and cook. Makes things easier, you know? She smiled, clearly unaware of the bomb she'd just dropped. A housekeeper? For a year? And I had no clue? I felt a mix of anger and betrayal boiling inside me, but I kept it together. Right, I see. Thanks, June. Would you mind giving us a moment? Of course. She wiped her hands and left the room. When Tom came home, he found me sitting in the living room, still processing everything. His face fell the moment he saw my expression. Who's June, Tom? I asked bluntly. Tom hesitated, then sighed. She's the housekeeper. Look, I meant to tell you, but I thought you'd be upset about me not doing the stuff around the house myself. Upset? Tom, you think I'd be upset about who cleans or cooks? I'm upset because you lied, because you thought this was something you had to hide. My voice rose with every word. I know, and I'm sorry. It started small, and then I just didn't know how to bring it up without making it a big deal. It seemed easier to just keep it going. He tried to explain, looking genuinely remorseful. Easier for who, Tom? Because this doesn't feel easy for me. I shot back. We talked it out that night. He apologized, and I tried to understand his perspective. But something had shifted between us, a small crack that made me wonder what else he might not be telling me. Things smoothed over a bit after that, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Tom continued to be great at making dinner and keeping the house in order, but now I knew he wasn't the one actually doing all the work. It felt like our roles were clear. I worked, and he managed the home, except he didn't really manage it, he outsourced it. And yet something about Tom's behavior was off, and it wasn't just the hidden housekeeper issue. His late-night whispers on the phone, his sudden need for privacy, and his constant excuses for needing more money, it all added up to something sinister. So, I did what any self-respecting woman with my resources would do. I hired a private detective. It wasn't long before the detective came back with news, and it wasn't the kind I'd hoped for. Tom was spending most of his days at a casino, and the sums of money he was losing were staggering. I felt a mix of relief and despair, relief that there wasn't another woman, but despair at the size of his deception. That evening, when Tom came home, I was waiting for him in the living room, the detective's report in hand. He tried to kiss me hello, but I stepped back, holding up the papers. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice cold and more composed than I felt. Tom sank down onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "I didn't mean for it to get this out of hand. It started small, just a way to blow off some steam. But it got bigger, and I didn't know how to stop." "And you thought the best way to deal with it was to lie to me? To steal from me?" My voice was rising now, my temper flaring. "I'm sorry, Elena. I'm so sorry. I need help. I want to quit, I swear. I need your help to get out of this mess." His voice was desperate, pleading. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. "I'll help you, Tom, but this is the last time. You need to get treatment for your addiction, and you're going to sign a receipt acknowledging the debt I'm paying off. It's $50,000, Tom." $50,000. Tom nodded miserably. "Yes, anything you say. I'll do it. I'll get help." We arranged for him to start treatment the following week. But just when I thought we might be finding our way back to some sort of normalcy, Tom dropped another bombshell. Out of the blue, he said, "Elena, I've been thinking, maybe we should have a baby. It might bring us closer." I stared at him, incredulous. "A baby? Tom, you know I can't. It's not just risky, it could be fatal for me." He quickly tried to backpedal. I know. I just thought, never mind." But the idea didn't go away. It kept coming up, more and more. Even his sister, an obstetrician, called me about it. "You should reconsider, Elena. Having a baby is the most natural thing. Don't be selfish." "Selfish? You're a doctor. You know my condition. How can you even suggest such a thing?" I was furious. She scoffed and hung up on me. The conversation left me shaken. How could they be so callous, so cruel? Months of tension and unresolved arguments had frayed my nerves, but nothing could have prepared me for the scene I walked into that fateful day. I returned home earlier than usual, my steps quickening with the anticipation of a quiet evening. Instead, I opened the door to chaos, boxes piled up, and Tom's sister, Lisa, and her husband, Mark, arranging their belongings around my living room. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice cutting through the noise. Lisa turned to face me, an unnerving calmness to her demeanor. "Oh, we're moving in, Elena. This is Tom's place, and you should really start packing your things." My eyes flicked to Tom, searching for some sign of confusion or disagreement on his face, but there was none. Instead, he met my gaze with a look that chilled me to the bone. "Elena, I can't do this anymore. You've been manipulating and controlling me for years. It's over," Tom declared, his voice cold and distant. I stared at him, dumbfounded. "Manipulating you? Tom, what are you talking about?" "You heard him," Mark chimed in, his voice just as harsh. "He's done being your slave." Tom stepped forward, a stack of papers in hand. "Here are the divorce papers. I'm also filing for compensation for years of emotional abuse and alimony. I need to look after my well-being now." The room spun as I took the papers from his hand. This was a nightmare. I glanced through the documents, each word a betrayal. But rising panic gave way to a steely calm. I let out a laugh, short and devoid of humor. "Well, you're in for a surprise. But go on, think what you want. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." Without another word, I went to our bedroom, packed a suitcase with essentials, and prepared to leave. There was no point in arguing. The man I had married, the man I thought I knew, was gone. I drove away from the apartment and headed toward the elite cottage village where I had a house waiting, a home that was truly mine, bought long before Tom entered my life. As I passed the familiar gates and nodded to the guards, a weight lifted off my shoulders. The house was exactly as I left it, spacious, quiet, and tailored to my needs. It had always been my sanctuary, a place I had prepared for my future, knowing my health might take a turn for the worse. As night fell, I made a few phone calls, informing my closest friends of the situation and reassuring them I was okay. My lawyer was up next, ready to discuss our strategy. Tom and his outrageous claims would not go unchallenged. A few days after settling into my sanctuary, I was startled by a frantic call from Tom. His voice, laced with panic and fury, blared through the phone. "Elena, you've set me up. This is some kind of sick game to you, isn't it?" Calmly, with a small smile, I replied, "Tom, if you think there's been a misunderstanding, why don't you come over and we'll talk about it? I'll send you the address." Soon after, the village gates swung open, and Tom, alongside Lisa and her husband Mark, drove through. I watched from the window as their car pulled up, their faces pressed against the car windows, eyes wide as they took in the view of my expansive home. They approached my front door, still gaping at the luxurious setting, their previous bravado seeming to shrink a bit. As I opened the door, I couldn't help but cough to clear the silence, then offered a wry smile. "Well, what brings you to my humble abode?" Tom, regaining some of his earlier fire, blurted out, "Your lawyer called me. He said I have to pay next month's rent for the apartment, $6,000. You never told me it wasn't your apartment. You never asked about it, and if you want to live in this apartment, pay the rent," I explained with deliberate patience. Lisa, ever the opportunist, chimed in, elbowing Tom. "And what about this place? It's gorgeous." Tom nodded vigorously. "Yeah, why don't you just give us this house instead of that apartment? Otherwise, we'll sue you for everything you've got." Their audacity was almost comical. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. "You want to sue me for this house? Tom, dear, I bought this house long before you were in the picture. You have no claim over it whatsoever." Their faces turned red with frustration, and the shouting escalated. "You can't just kick us out. We have rights," Tom yelled. "That's where you're wrong," I replied, my voice firm as I picked up the phone. "Security, could you please escort these people out? They seem to be lost." Within minutes, the village security arrived, and the trio was promptly shown out. As they were escorted away, their indignant protests faded into the distance, leaving behind a quiet that settled over the house like a comforting blanket. After they left, I sat back down, the laughter gone, replaced by a weary sigh. It was clear that Tom and his sister were grasping at straws, trying to intimidate me into giving up what was rightfully mine. I called my lawyer again, going over the details of the day's confrontation. "We need to be prepared for whatever they might try next," I told him, my tone resolute. "Don't worry, Elena. We'll handle this. They have no legal standing," he reassured me. The day of the court hearing arrived with a tension thick enough to slice through. I walked into the courtroom, my lawyer at my side, ready to face whatever Tom and his family had concocted. The allegations were ludicrous. Tom claimed that I had exploited him, turning him into what he dramatically referred to as my slave. He recounted stories of endless chores and a thankless life under my supposed tyranny, all while his sister Lisa and her husband Mark nodded vigorously, echoing his every word. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Luckily, it was soon our turn to present the reality of the situation. My lawyer stood, adjusting his suit jacket with a calm assurance. "Your Honor, we have evidence that contradicts every single one of Mr. Thomas's claims," he stated confidently, then turned to call our first witness. The au pair Tom had hired, June, came forward. I worked in their home, doing all the household chores and cooking. Mr. Thomas Elliot hardly lifted a finger. She testified, her statement backed by employment records and salary slips proving Tom hardly contributed to the household work as he claimed. After June's testimony, my lawyer presented the prenuptial agreement. As per this legally binding document, signed by both parties, he continued, pointing to the signatures at the bottom of the page. It clearly states that in the event of a divorce, Mr. Elliott is entitled to nothing. No alimony, no compensation. The courtroom was silent as the weight of the document sank in. Tom's face drained of color when my lawyer added, "Mr. Elliott, did you read this document before you signed it?" Tom stuttered. "Well, I saw the part about if something happened to Elena, but you didn't read it all. Is that correct?" my lawyer pressed. "Yes, but I didn't think." "You didn't think to read what you were signing," my lawyer cut him off, turning back to the judge. "Your Honor, we also wish to present proof of Mr. Elliott gambling debts, which Mrs. Elliott generously cleared, and for which we have a signed acknowledgement from Mr. Elliott himself." I watched as Tom slumped in his seat, the reality of his situation finally hitting him. When the judge finally spoke, her voice was clear and firm. "After reviewing the evidence and hearing the testimonies, it is this court's decision to grant the divorce requested by Mrs. Elena Elliott. Furthermore, all claims for compensation and alimony by Mr. Thomas Elliott are denied." As we walked out of the courtroom, a sense of profound relief washed over me. But that relief was quickly overshadowed by the spectacle outside the courtroom. Lisa was furiously berating Tom, her words sharp and unforgiving. "You fool. All you had to do was get her pregnant and died, then we could have had everything. You couldn't even do that right." I stopped for a moment to take in the scene, the reality of their treachery settling in deeper. They hadn't just wanted money, they had hoped for my demise. Months had passed since the courtroom drama had unfolded, and I had slowly begun to reclaim my peace, focusing on my health and my business. One crisp morning, as I sipped my coffee and reviewed some business reports, the serenity was abruptly disrupted by an unexpected visitor. I glanced at the security monitor and saw Tom, looking disheveled and desperate, at the gates of my village. I instructed the guards to let him in, curious yet cautious about his sudden appearance. As he approached the front door, I could see the strain in his face, the weight of his recent hardships etched into his features. He fell to his knees as soon as I opened the door, an act so dramatic it almost seemed rehearsed. "Elena, please, I'm begging you, take me back. I'll do anything. I'll cook, clean, anything you want. Just let me stay here," he pleaded, his voice breaking. I stared down at him, my expression calm yet firm. "Tom, after everything, why would you think I'd ever consider such a thing? It wasn't all my idea, Elena. It was Lisa's plan to push for the baby, to end things that way. I never wanted any of it to happen. I swear, I was just caught up in it," he blurted out, desperation seeping through his every word. I took a deep breath, keeping my composure. "Tom, what you're failing to understand is that it's not just about what happened, or who planned what. It's about trust. And you broke that beyond repair. You didn't just follow Lisa's plans, you stood by her knowing full well how dangerous her schemes were for me." He scrambled to his feet, reaching out as if he could physically pull back the relationship we once had. "Elena, I'm lost without you. I've taken out a loan to pay back the $50,000, and I've started working again. I'm trying to fix my mistakes." "Fixing your mistakes doesn't mean you get to rewind and erase the consequences," I replied sharply. "What you need to understand, Tom, is that you chose this path. Now you must walk it alone." His face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him, almost. But then I remembered the cold, calculating discussions about my health and potential demise. "I want you to leave. Now," I said, my voice unwavering. "And Tom, don't come back. You are not welcome here, not now, not ever." When he hesitated, still trying to muster another plea, I turned and signaled to the security personnel who had discreetly remained close by. They stepped forward, escorting him away as he called out my name, his cries fading into the distance. After he was gone, I stood at the doorway for a few moments, letting the silence wash over me again. This house, this life, I had built it, and I would not let anyone disrupt it again. I returned to my morning routine, the disturbance now settling into a resolved chapter of my life. Looking ahead, my thoughts turned to future plans, the dreams of travel and meeting new people. The world was wide, and my heart, once burdened by betrayal, now felt lighter with possibilities.